That idea of the democratic process. My first experience with that, my first memory, is back in the mid-60s. My mother was talking to everyone in town about the millage. And millage was a new word to me, and so I asked her, what does that word mean? And she said, millage means 1/10 of 1 cent, or 1,000th of a dollar. And she explained that the city wanted to raise taxes by 2 mills and dedicate the funds to the schools. And I said, who would be against that? And she said that some people who don't have children didn't want to pay to educate the people who did. The millage passed, and my mother was very happy. My first political action that I participated in was leafleting the town against urban renewal. One of President Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society programs. How our town of 4,500 people with only one stoplight became classified as an urban center is one of the great mysteries of political negotiation. But in short, the federal government was giving money to support downtown areas and revitalize them. My grandfather had 2 objections. He felt that the town would get money to tear things down, but not any money to build things up. And the second, unspoken reason was that our family businesses were on the highway, which bypassed downtown and thus ineligible for any funds. I followed my sister Susie door to door. She was 5'0", 14 years old, standing her ground and debating grown-ups. It was pretty impressive. Nevertheless, we lost that fight of against what we called urban disturbance. My first opportunity to vote was in 1978. There was a proposal to raise the drinking age in Michigan from 18 to 21. Being 18, I was against this. And I remember standing in the student union and watching the reports come in, and all my college friends were so disappointed that this didn't pass. And I asked them, did you vote? And they said, no. And I said, you have no reason to complain. I was so angry at them. So, thus it was legal for me to drink when I was 18, but not when I was 19 or 20. My memory is hazy, but I do believe I participated in many acts of civil disobedience in the intervening years. This week, we lost a giant whose civil disobedience was much more noble than mine. John Lewis had his skull broken by police as he crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. He was marching for voting rights. His activism was rooted in his Christian faith and his belief in nonviolence. And many Unitarian Universalists were motivated by their faith and went down to Selma to join him. 2 of those Unitarian Universalists, James Reeb and Viola Liuzzo, were murdered by racists at that time. Our congregations, our denomination, has long been a leader in voting rights. Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton led the movement for women's suffrage. In our time, voting rights are under attack. Voting rights are being challenged by gerrymandering, voter ID laws, purging the voter rolls, reducing the number of polling areas in black communities are among some of the issues and tactics being used. In addition, this year, COVID-19 pandemic has made in-person voting dangerous. I read in the paper today that voting judges, poll workers, will be required to wear masks, but people standing in line, the voters, will not. This dangerous situation makes voting by mail so much more important. The expansion of mail-in voting is being resisted by those who prefer that black and brown people stand in long lines for hours. The long lines tend to occur in minority districts, while white people are able to go in and out of their poll places with a little bit of time. It's as if whites are hoping that minorities will die if they dare to vote. This year, more than ever, democracy is at risk. The fifth principle of Unitarian Universalism is to affirm and promote the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process in our congregations and society at large. But how do we do this? We are a spiritual congregation, not a political action committee. On February 6, 2020, the UUA held a webinar entitled Prophetic, Not Partisan, Understanding IRS Nonprofit Regulations for Your Congregation. And I like the title of this idea of being prophetic. The idea that there is injustices in the society and it is our duty as people of an ethical and moral persuasion to speak out. In this seminar, Reverend Bob Keithan, Minister of Justice at All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church in Washington, D.C., summarized, there is a small list of completely prohibited things. You cannot advocate for or against candidates or political parties, but you must remain strictly nonpartisan. What that leaves is a whole range of activities that you can do, related to advocating for issues that represent your values, to helping people get registered and mobilized and educated to vote. It is okay to help protect the vote, to ensure people have access to it. It's okay to target underrepresented communities for voter registration. There's a huge number of things that we can do that do not violate the IRS code, so long as we're not endorsing particular candidates or parties. More detailed explanation of these rules can be found on the UUA website in an essay called The Real Rules. This year, the UUA has launched a program called UU the Vote, and the purpose is to promote democracy, to give all people a voice, for all to express their opinion by the means that matters, voting. The purging of voter rolls is a real issue. In 2016, North Carolina people were allowed to challenge a person's registration at polling places. This process primarily targeted African American voters. According to Matthew Burns, writing for WRAL, state law has allowed any voter to challenge another voter's registration if they live in the same county. A challenge resulted in a hearing where the voter who was challenged could present evidence of his or her residence, and local elections officials then made the decision as to whether to remove the voter. In 2016, one Cumberland County resident representing the Voter Integrity Project of North Carolina challenged 4,000 voters. And a voter representing the Moore Voter Integrity Project challenged almost 500 Moore County voters. 4 people in Beaufort County challenged about 140 voters there. The challenges were made based on a single piece of mail sent to the voter by activists, and when it went unreturned, then they challenged that vote, and they were mostly upheld. For the 3 county election boards, and the registrations of about 3,900 voters were canceled. Many of them at the point that they were at the poll ready to cast their vote. The NAACP sued and they won their case. In 2018, a judge said activists did not follow the federal standards that require a person to miss 2 federal elections before being removed. So this past year, the Board of Elections was very careful in following the rules. And in doing so, they removed 576 and 534 voters from the voting rolls. They did this between the dates of December 29, 2018 and January 5th, 2019. What makes this most recent purge seem so dramatic is that it was almost all done in 1 week during the holidays, a time where there would be few new people registering or even thinking about voting. So imagine if you got a card the week after Christmas and had to return it within a week in order to keep your right to vote. Are you sure you checked your mail after the Christmas rush and during the New Year celebrations? The timing has special significance for residents of New Bern. This was 3 months after Hurricane Florence. Many were still displaced. People were living in temporary residences until their primary residence was restored. And those people who were living in their registered address were probably too busy making home repairs to check the mail carefully. So the first action that I want each of you to do is to check to see if you are registered. Go to the NC State Board of Elections, ncsbe.gov, click on voter registrations, scroll down a considerable way to voter lookup tool. Then enter your information and find out if you are registered. You may have been purged. Now, if you do not like computers, you can make a personal visit to the Craven County Board of Elections, 406 Craven Street in downtown New Bern. Our social action ministry will be working on helping people check their registration. UU Forward Together is our state justice network involving congregations and UUs from across the state. It is a progressive, faith-based, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to give life the shape of justice. supporting the social justice work of individual UUs and UU congregations in North Carolina, building relationships with others in our community who are working for justice, living into our Unitarian Universalist values with respect to important racial, economic, environmental, and political issues in North Carolina. Joining with two organizations, Democracy North Carolina, who met at our building when our building was open, and You Can Vote. We plan to send postcards to people who have been purged, to give them a chance to restore their right to vote. The postcards are in kits of 10, they're pre-addressed and ready to send out. All we have to do is add postage, and the UU the Vote UUA has a grant that'll help us pay for that. They're set out in packets of 10. So think about how many postcards you might be willing to write to help people restore their right to vote. And let me know. You'll see more information about this in updates throughout the election season. Another important thing in this pandemic is voting by mail. You can go to the Craven County Board of Elections, to their website, and get a 2020 state absentee ballot request form. First, you have to fill out the form, mail it in, and then your ballot will be mailed to you. I think that as the numbers of people with COVID-19 in North Carolina rises, anyone in a risk group should consider voting from home. No excuse is needed to vote absentee in North Carolina. However, you do need a witness to sign your ballot. That can be a spouse, a family member, anybody, unless that person is actually running for office. Another option is to vote early and avoid the crowds on election day. The Board of Election does not have these dates on their website yet, but we will keep you posted. There are so many more things that one can do to secure the right to vote for themselves and others. Your involvement can range from sending money to advocacy groups, to going door to door, to doing all sorts of things, contacting family members to make sure that they are registered. Now, some of you may choose to work for your specific party. And as UUs, we affirm your right to do so. But such partisan things will not be part of our UU the Vote process. It is something that any of us is free to do if they feel that's the way that we can best be involved in this activity. Our country is about the expansion of freedom. In our Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson declared that all men were created equal. And as a slave owner, he actually meant property-owning white men. Most state constitutions at the time demanded that white men own property. Kentucky lifted this requirement in 1792. North Carolina was the last to repeal this provision in 1856. In 1870, 5 years after the Civil War, the 15th Amendment gave black men the right to vote. It took 50 years and the 19th Amendment to give women voting rights. In 1924, Native Americans were officially made citizens of the United States. However, Arizona and New Mexico did not allow them to vote until 1948. In 1943, Chinese immigrants were finally allowed to vote. In 1961, the 23rd Amendment allowed the citizens of Washington, D.C. to vote for president. And in 1971, the voting age was lowered from 21 to 18. There has always been resistance to every expansion of freedom. And once a law is made, people have found ways to work around it until they were challenged in court and allowed to vote. The Voting Rights Act, one of the provisions, was suspended a few years ago by the Supreme Court. They basically decided, since it had worked to stop voter discrimination, that it was no longer needed. It was kind of like saying, well, since people are obeying stop signs, we don't need them anymore. The intervening years shows that we do need them. And so we have to work all the harder to expand democracy while there are forces trying to restrict voting rights. We can overcome those who wish to restrict voting rights. Our faith affirms the inherent worth and dignity of every person and the use of the democratic process. It's difficult work. It's tedious at times, building all the contacts and the coalitions and trying to get things organized. But once organized, it becomes good work. And this year is harder to organize because we have the added burden of social distancing, in-person rallies, and voter registration can be dangerous, and Zoom meetings are a burden to many. But if we do not tend the flames of freedom, they may go out. This is not the time to be hopeless. There are those who want people to give up hope, who add so much chaos to the system that some people believe there's no reason for them to vote. We must have faith in each other. We must offer hope to the marginalized. This planet needs the voices of those who want to live in harmony. If we want to secure the future, there's no time like the present. Let us overcome past injustices and build on past victories. Let the voices of the people be heard, now and forevermore. In the words of Congressman John Lewis, hero John Lewis, he said, "Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful and optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is a struggle of a lifetime. Never ever be afraid to make some noise. and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. So I ask you, who are Unitarian Universalists, to be willing to stir up some good trouble this fall, this summer, to ensure that people have the right to vote in the United States. May we bless and be blessed. Please join in singing hymn number 123, Spirit of Life.